Well, today, if you were to look at our preaching calendar, and yes, we have one, we seek God, we seek the direction that He's leading us in as a church, and then we fill that out from there. Today, you would see that we were going to continue our series on spiritual gifts, which has been absolutely wonderful, by the way. But sometimes what God does with our plans is He takes them and He just turns them just a little bit. Anybody ever experienced that? And so today, we're going to be speaking on something that I've been sensing from God over the past week or two, several weeks. You see, last week, if you were with us, we looked at how do we use our spiritual gifts. We looked at 1 Corinthians 13 about what is love, what does love look like. And we made the case, we saw from Scripture that the way we use our spiritual gifts is in love. And if we use them without love, we are misusing our gifts. But as I was preparing that message and looking through love and looking through that passage, and you read such things as love is patient, love is kind. You see where it says love does not boast and doesn't envy, and that it doesn't carry out its cases of wrong. It doesn't bear grudges. You see that love is not easily angered, all of these things. And then with that in your mind, then you look at what's going on in our world today, and you just don't see much of that. When was the last time you turned on the news and you saw a great example of love, of people being patient with each other? When was the last time you got on the news and you saw where people were being kind to each other, especially to those they disagree with? You see, it's easy to be patient and kind with people that we agree with. That's not the test of love. But of acting out what Jesus said when He said to love our enemies. How much of that do we see in our world today? You see, this year, 2020, it is a year that we are all going to remember. There's all kinds of things going on around us. It's to the point where you see something else that's going wrong, and you just think, well, there's another one. It's just not surprising anymore. You know, we talked about COVID. That came on the scene here in America, at least back in March. I think January is when it sprang up kind of throughout the world. And now all the implications that we're navigating because of COVID, because of the government's response and businesses' response and the schools' response. Now really simple things that used to be simple, like going to the grocery store, much, much more complicated. Many families right here in this town, they're trying to navigate schooling for their kids, which is extremely complicated right now. And so because of that, people are being divided. We're being divided by the response to COVID-19. We're being divided by these things right here. Who knew that what does this weigh, about an ounce? Who knew that it would have such power and control over our interactions with each other? We're being divided from each other. And then you throw in a whole slew of nationwide protests and riots. And then you throw in a presidential election to boot. We as a culture and as a society, we're being torn apart. You see, there's many forces and there's much work being done in the world around us today to bring disunity to people. And the danger as the church, the danger is that creeps in here as well. And when I'm speaking of the church, I'm talking about the Big C church, the church across the nation. You can see bits of that disunity and that division coming within the church. And that's scary indeed. But you see, within these chaotic times, we're all seeking. We're seeking for peace. We're seeking for calm. We're seeking for the answers. And you know, as I was thinking about that, I was reminded that it was just a few decades ago, a couple of generations ago, during the 1960s, that was a time of chaos. Look, in the 60s, you have the Vietnam War going on and all the protests against that. You see the sexual revolution in full bloom, raging all steam ahead. You see the election and assassination of JFK. That was a time of great turmoil and unrest. And within that, people were seeking for the same thing. They were seeking for peace, for unity, for calm. You see, within that time period, actually it was in 1970, I believe, but speaking against those forces of division that he was experiencing, that's when John Lennon wrote a very famous song. A song simply titled, Imagine. You know the words to that song? I want to read some of them for you. Let's go ahead and put that up. And in there it says this: Imagine there's no heaven, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this song on the radio, never caught that first line. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. That there's no hell below us, above us is only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Let's put the next verse up. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Keep going. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. You see, Lenin, he looked at the world around him. He saw the great division and the conflict, and he put the blame on religion, on faith. He put the blame on people that would follow God. But his desire there, put the chorus back up there if you will. His desire that he wants to see is reflected in the last line of that chorus. Keep going, one more. Like I said, one more after that too. There we are. The world will be as one. That's the world that Lenin wants to see. And do you know where he got that desire, by the way? Do you know where he got that desire to see the world united, to see the world as one? He got it from Jesus. You see, Jesus has that very same desire, that the world would be one, that the world would be united. Now, Lenin goes about it a very different way than Jesus goes about it. And you know what? We've tried Lenin's way over the past generation or two. You see, we as a society and as a culture, we've tried to pretend that there's no heaven and no hell. We've tried to pretend that religion really doesn't matter. We've began to live for today, not worrying at all about what the rest of the world may think or feel. And what has that brought us? Nothing but even greater division and conflict and destroyed lives. But I wonder, how does Jesus seek that same goal? That goal of seeing the world as one. How does Jesus go about trying to bring that to fruition? Well, that's what I want us to see today. You see, today we're going to look at a very famous prayer of Jesus. Now, when he prayed this prayer, this was at a very tough time for him because he had just had the Last Supper with his friends and followers. Judas had just gotten up to leave. He was going out to betray Jesus, to round up the officers, the mob that would come and arrest him. Jesus takes his followers and they go out to the garden, and he knows that his time of being arrested and really executed, he knows that that's coming. He knows that right now everything is on the line. And when you come to those moments in your life, when you realize that everything is on the line, your prayers get real quick. And so Jesus, he goes out to the garden, and he's becoming overwhelmed with what's working within him. And so he tells his disciples, stay here so I can go and pray. And he brings a few with him, and he goes out a little bit further, and he tells them, no, stay here so that I can pray. And then he prays. And that prayer, it's recorded for us in the Bible. And in there we see, what is Jesus' greatest desire right now? When his prayers got real, so to speak, what is it that he prayed for? Well, first, I find it really interesting who he prayed for. You see, he prayed for his friends. He prayed for the church, really, in its infancy. And I want us to see what he prayed. If you have your Bibles, open them up to John chapter 17. And this whole chapter, this is the prayer of Jesus. If you have one of those red letter Bibles, you'll notice the whole chapter's in red, because this is Jesus speaking the whole way through. Now look down to verse 9. See, Jesus starts off the prayer as many of the priests of old would do. He prays for himself and intercedes for himself with God. And then he turns his attention, his focus, to the people. And so look at verse 9. This is what it says. Jesus says, I pray for them. I am not praying for the world, but for those you have given me, for they are yours. All I have is yours, and all you have is mine. And glory has come to me through them. I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. Jesus has the same desire that his people would be one with each other. He prays for unity amongst his followers. You know, it's very interesting right there. You see, he didn't pray that his followers would have great success in their ministry. He didn't pray that the church would have great standing in front of kings and emperors. He didn't pray that they might have power over the Roman Empire. He didn't pray any of those things. He prayed that they would be one, even as Jesus is one with the Father. Now, why is that? Why was unity such a big deal for Jesus? Look at verse 13. He gives us one reason. He says, I am coming to you now. Remember, he's praying to God. But I say these things while I am still in the world, so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. You see, Jesus, all through the Gospels, he is concerned about our joy. You see him express the desire over and over again that his people would have joy and have it to the full. You hear him say something or pray something, and he says, I've done this that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full. Why is it that God wants us to have full and complete joy? Well, because the only place we can find it is in Jesus. You see, we spend our whole lives looking for joy. We look to our work. We look there for joy, and we don't find it. We look to our relationships for joy. We get married expecting that our husband or our wife, they're going to be full joy to me. And we find out that's much too great of a burden to put on anybody. We look to our kids for joy. We try to live life through them, and that doesn't work. We look to our investments. We look to our bank accounts for joy. And then a recession hits, and you realize there's not much joy there either. God wired us and designed us to pursue joy, and he did it on purpose, knowing that the only place we can find it is within Jesus himself. Jesus says that joy that you're seeking, seek it to the full. Don't give up seeking joy, because the only place we can find it is within him. Now, you may be wondering and thinking as we're reading this prayer, you're saying, well, that's well and good for those guys that were with Jesus. I hope they were unified, and I hope they had joy. But what in the world does that have to do with us today? Well, skip down to verse 20. Jesus says this. He says, my prayer, it's not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message. You see, Jesus, even as he was getting ready to be crucified on the cross, he knew that his disciples, these 11 that he had with him, remember Judas was already gone, that they were going to go out and make disciples. They were going to bring more people to follow Jesus. And these disciples that they made, they were going to go out and make disciples, who were then going to go out and make disciples. You see the cycle here. It repeats over and over and over again. And eventually we'll be to the point to where we are today, where followers of Jesus outnumber any other religion on the face of the earth. Jesus knew that was going to happen. And he prayed for each and every one of these future disciples that would follow him. You see, when Jesus prays this in verse 20, he's praying for you and me. He's extending his prayer to everyone alive today, to anyone that calls upon the name of Christ today. And what does he pray? Verse 21. This is his prayer. That all of them may be one. Are you hearing this theme, church? Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they might be one, even as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Why is unity such a big deal for Jesus? Not only does it bring joy, but because it is the greatest testimony we can ever give to the world. You see, if you've been in church life for a long time, maybe you grew up within church, you've heard all kinds of different evangelistic programs, and there's nothing wrong with those. Those are great. But the greatest evangelistic program that a church can ever have, meaning the best way that a church can ever show Jesus to non-believers around it, is to have unity, loving unity with each other. And you know why? Because that's something the world misses completely today. Have you noticed that no matter what happens, sooner or later it gets turned into a political argument? No matter what happens, everything's political all of a sudden. I have no idea where that came from. It comes from our natural desire for division and for disunity. But within that world, a world that's being torn apart, where families are torn apart, where businesses are torn apart, where neighbors are torn apart by all this constant division, if there is a light in that world, a group of people that have loving unity with each other, that's the testimony of Jesus. There's no greater picture of Jesus to the world than a church that lives in loving unity. Now, the tragic part is that the opposite is also true. There's no greater hindrance to the gospel message in the world today than a church that lives with disunity, or a church that has split after split, or a church that's seeking just to control each other. There's no greater hindrance to the gospel message than that. Because someone that doesn't know Jesus, they're going to hear about Jesus, they're going to look at Jesus' people. And what do they see when they look at the followers of Jesus? They either see Jesus or they don't. Unity. This is vital, oh church. Not just for us here at CenterPoint. It's vital for the churches in Columbia. It's vital for the churches in the nation, for the churches in the world. Unity is what Jesus prayed for each of us. So where does the greatest threat to unity come from? We have all these different causes of unity. I mentioned our disunity. I mentioned a few of them, talking about COVID and politics and elections and all of that. But those are really symptoms of the disease. Hey, I'm digging it. That's all right. That's all right. Don't feel bad. I've had more than once how my phone's gone off in the middle of a sermon. It's really okay. But let's look here. Where is the source of all this disunity? You know, Jesus, he gives us the answer right in his prayer. Look back at verse 14. He says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them. I mean, Jesus says, we're going to have trouble. Trouble's coming. There's no way around it. For they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world. I mean, Jesus isn't praying that we would avoid trouble at all cost. But he says, my prayer is that you protect them from the evil one. You see, the greatest threat to unity that we have, it's not any person that you see or any person that you know. It's Satan himself. He's the one that's the great accuser of the saints. Now, what I mean by that is that Satan is the one that he's speaking. He's trying to speak within your mind and your heart. And he does a couple different things. You see, sometimes he tells you that you'll never be good enough. Sometimes he tells you that you're unlovable. Sometimes Satan tells you that you should be full of shame for everything that's wrong in your life. And if we internalize that, then we don't want to have unity with each other because we don't want people to know who we really are. But the grace of the gospel is that Jesus has already taken care of all of that. You see, the good news of the gospel is that when we follow Jesus, we are a new creation. And so that person that Satan's bringing up, I don't know who that is. He's not here anymore. There's only a new person, someone that's created within Jesus. And so that's one way that Satan tries to accuse the saints. Another way is this. He might point out, instead of the flaws within our own lives, he might point out flaws in the lives of others. He'll have you look at the church and he'll say, you don't want to belong to that. That's a group of people full of hypocrites. Don't you see the way they live and the way they speak to each other? And so that keeps unity from happening. The greatest threat to unity that we can have is Satan himself. Look at this right here. I want to show you how Satan operates. Can you see this? If I put it up my shirt, does that help at all? What that is, that's a single Lego piece. And this one's pretty neat. It's got a hole right in the middle. I guess you can do cool things with that. I'm not sure. But you see, what Satan does is he holds you out like this, like you are this Lego brick. And he says, look at that. He says, your edges are nice and sharp. Your round parts, oh, they're rounder than anybody else's. He says, you are a shiny Lego brick. There's no dirt or anything within you. He says, keep it that way. But what's the problem with a single Lego brick? You can't do anything with it. Take this and build something with it. It can't be done. You see, the power of Legos, they come when they are united. Now, what this is I asked my son to build me a church, and this is what I got. And so this is a church. He even got, you can't see it, but there's even Iron Man is inside of there. He says Iron Man needs to go to church. And I'm well, full agreement with him. Now, in this church, it's hard to see individual bricks. In fact, in this church, it's impossible to see them all. Because if you're looking at it this way, you can't see the ones in the back. But this is the power of unity. When all of those single individual bricks, when they come together, then a church can be built. Remember, Jesus says, I will build my church. He doesn't build his church with a bunch of individual bricks that want to stay alone. He builds his church with a group of people that are united by the cause of Christ. And sometimes we make the mistake. Sometimes we say, well, okay, well, that church is great, and I'd like to be a part of the church, but the only way I'll do that is if I'm on top right here, or I want to be in front right here. I want to make sure everybody sees me. But that's not the church. You see, when we come together, when we have unity, joyful, loving unity with each other, then we don't mind taking our individual brick, who we are, and even coming back here, where no one might ever see us. Because you see, the joy that comes with being a part of the church is the joy of realizing that we're not just part of this church right here. We're not just part of CenterPoint. We're a part of the church that has existed for centuries. We're part of the church that includes Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. We're part of the church that has Jeremiah and Paul and Peter. We are part of the church that has Jesus Christ as the cornerstone himself. And the great honor that we have is we get to be a part of that. We get to be a part with the great heroes of the faith. Think about the greatest hero of the faith that you could think of. Could be someone in the Bible, or could be a sweet grandmother, anything like that. Mother Teresa. We get to be a part of the church with them. That's the power of unity, oh church. That's why Jesus is so concerned with unity. And that's why Satan attacks it so much. Because you see, if Satan keeps us as a bunch of these just kind of sitting around, he's not worried about that. But this, remember Jesus says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it. This is terrifying to Satan. And so Jesus prays that we would have unity, and not a unity that's based on politics, not a unity that's based on responses to COVID or how to navigate COVID-19, not a unity that's based on any of that stuff, or even based on identical theologies, not a unity that's based on culture or language or music or any of that, but a unity that's based on Jesus Christ as the cornerstone to the church. Are you with me this morning? This is the message that Jesus gives us. This is what's been burning within me, is this great call for unity. So how do we get there? How do we walk in unity with each other? Well, I'll share a couple things with you. You see, the first step to walking in unity is to love and pray for each other well. Love each other well, pray for each other well. It's to let God's call for unity be visible within our lives. It's living out the great commandment that Jesus gave us, love God and love people. It's taking that seriously and living our lives in such a way that honors that command. You see, if we go back to the Last Supper, before this prayer was uttered, back in chapter 13, Jesus he gives them the key to unity. And this is a verse that many people know. He says, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. You must also love one another." Do you feel the weight of that, church? Jesus says, as I have loved you, go and love each other. Jesus says, as I have loved you as a person, as I have served you, as I have sacrificed for you, go and serve and sacrifice for others. Jesus didn't let any politics get in his way. Jesus had a tendency of bringing together people that would have been sworn enemies. You see, he brought together Simon the Zealot, who was a sworn enemy of Rome. The Zealots had this habit, really, of going around and getting tax collectors and Roman soldiers, whenever they could find them by themselves, and they would just kill them. They were trying to liberate Israel from Roman control. Jesus took one of theirs, Simon, and he took Matthew, the tax collector, and he brought them together for unity. The church has this way. If you keep reading the story of the church, continue through the Gospels, you'll see how people from vastly different cultures that would have been antagonistic towards each other, that would have hated each other, but within the church, they come together and they have unity because unity is built upon Jesus. And it's because understanding that unity, it is not uniformity. Unity does not mean that we speak the same or look the same or act the same or listen to the same music or any of that. Unity is just this simple. It's simple, really. It's the desire and the will to love a person as Jesus has loved us, and to not let anything get in the way of that. And so Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. What does that have to do with unity? The very next verse says this: by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. The greatest testimony we could ever give to an unbelieving world is the loving unity of Christ. There's nothing that can stand against it, nothing that can overcome it. You see, this chaotic world that we're living in, it's pulling people apart. All kinds of division, all kinds of conflict, all over the place. All kinds of mistrust. It's hard to even know who to trust anymore. But within that, Jesus brings himself. He brings the Holy Spirit. He brings the church, you all right here, to show what loving unity can be. He brings the church to be the calm within the storm. When the church does that, oh, they're unstoppable. Unity is vital to Jesus. It's more vital than anything we could ever think. Because unity, it brings us great joy. It shows us how to spread the gospel, how to show people the love of Christ. Unity is more important. Now, this doesn't mean that other things are less important. These issues that I've brought up, they're serious issues that we need to think through, we need to study, we need to be aware of. But we need to remember that people are more important. Don't sacrifice people on the altar of being right. Too often we have that backwards. Now, I took the liberty of rewriting John Lennon's song. I already told you he didn't do a great job. I don't think he would mind. He died about 40 years ago. So anyways. Now within this, I'm going to give you a disclaimer up front. I have my spiritual gifts. Music is not one of them. Be gracious to me. It's probably going to make our worship band cringe. I should have had one of them write this. But I think this is how Jesus would call us to this goal of being one. And then we're going to act that out through communion here in just a few minutes. Imagine there's a heaven. There is a heaven. It's easy if you try. And God's people on earth living for Christ on high. Imagine all the people living for the one. Imagine the defeat of Satan. It isn't hard to do. There's no gossips, there's no quarreling, and there's no accuser too. Imagine all the people living with the one. Now, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Maybe one day you'll join us and the world will truly be one. Imagine a church united. Now, don't say that you can't. There's no petty divisions. There's only love for fellow saints. Imagine all the people united as one. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Jesus prayed that we would have unity and that we would all live as one. Matt, you want to come up here?